two-day attacks against Ukraine. So around 5 a.m., which was 6 p.m. Moscow time on the 24th of February, Putin announced a special military operation in eastern Ukraine. Minutes later, missile strikes began at locations across Ukraine, including the capital, Kiev. The Ukrainian border service stated that its border posts with Russia and Belarus were attacked. Now, 2 hours later, Russian ground forces entered the country. The president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, responded by enacting martial law, severing diplomatic ties with Russia, and announcing general mobilization. Now, the invasion received widespread international condemnation, including sanctions being imposed on Russia, while anti-war protests in Russia were met with mass arrests. I think as of yesterday, over 1,500 people in Russia have been arrested and detained for protesting against this attack. And so today we will be having a conversation about the Russian-Ukraine conflict, and considering the fact that we do have Nigerians in Ukraine because they have a record of good medical schools. And so how does this affect Nigerians? What's Nigeria's position on all of this? And what do we think about it? And so we will be having an open mic conversation with Nigerians, with all of you in this room, to see what we think about the situation. And I'll take generally. And one of our speakers today is Fola Aino, who is a security and leadership expert, who has written a couple of thought pieces and opinion pieces on security implications such as this. And so it's my pleasure to welcome you all to Newswire Nigeria's Twitter Spaces. And today we will be discussing the Russia versus Ukraine conflict and its impact on Nigeria and Africa. So if you would like to speak and share your thoughts about this, please send a request now. We'll bring you up to hear your position and to also learn more about this conflict and what we think about it and the way forward. Hi, Fola. I've sent you a request. Also, Kelvin, thanks for joining us. Good evening, Kelvin. So let's hear your take on the Russia-Ukraine crisis, first of all.
Andy, hi. So much has changed since the last time we spoke.
Yes, good evening.
Okay, so I was on Silverbird TV earlier this morning. I was talking about the implications for Nigeria, and I'm going to focus on the numbers, so we'll have perspective on what the direct economic impact is on Nigeria. 62.8% of the wheat Nigeria imports to produce flour that is used to make bread and all kinds of food. Bread is actually the second most consumed staple in Nigeria, I think, after rice. 62.8% of it comes from Russia. Russia is actually the largest exporter of grains in the world, by the way. And then 9.8% of the petroleum products, including AGO, PMS, kerosene, aviation fuel that Nigeria consumes, actually comes from Russia. You have other things like blood. Nigerians import blood from Russia. Vaccines, Nigeria imports vaccines from Russia. You have culture. Culture is like live bacteria used in making yogurt. Nigeria also imports steel from Russia. It imports ammonium nitrate that is used to make blend fertilizers, diammonium phosphate, DAP, and muriate of potash. And also, I just wanted to point out that, before I yield the mic, if you look at the shipping route globally, there is like a small aperture between northern Istanbul and Bulgaria that is called the Bosporus Channel. The Bosporus Channel is like the Suez Canal in the Nile River in Egypt. Now that channel is very small. It's the primary route from which all the ships that is coming from Odessa, the southern part of Ukraine, and the southwestern part of Russia, they go through into the Mediterranean all the way to, if you're coming to Africa, you're going all the way down to the Atlantic to South America or North America. So that's a very important trade route for both Ukraine and Russia in the Baltics. And considering that Turkey is actually a non-EU NATO member, and Ukraine has already requested that Turkey blocks the Bosporus channel so that Russian vessels cannot go through that aperture. It's going to be interesting what will happen to the price of commodities, like we're seeing, like inflation in the last 3 days, and what will happen to shipping lines increasing premiums on insurance for moving goods around the world. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Kelvin. We'll come back to you to discuss this in detail. So we've had the economic impact. A couple of countries have now said, okay, they will be placing sanctions. Now, I listened to the U.S. president's press conference on this matter yesterday, and you could sense a bit of hesitation on the next move to take. But before we even delve deeper into this conversation, we have Fola Aina, who is a security and leadership expert, to share his overview of what this conflict and crisis is about, and his thoughts on it before we go deeper to its implication on Nigeria and Africa. Good evening, Fola. The mic is yours.
Hi, good evening, Andy. Good evening, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here. Normally, I like to say that when I join Twitter Spaces, I just want to listen, and learn as much as I can learn. But of course, with Andy, I don't get to say no. So
exactly.
It's an honor to be here. Really, really glad. So let me just share my thoughts, on what I think is happening, and I'll be saying some things. So again, what I'll try to do is I'll try to provide as much context as I can provide, because I'm going to be saying a lot of things that are perhaps not out there in the mainstream. Okay, so I'm going to be basically bringing a lot of nuanced angles to the conversation that perhaps haven't really seen the light of day, And so the first thing I'm going to talk about, is why things have gotten to the state that they've gotten to. So a quick background is that, prior to, during the Cold War, okay, just for our listeners who might not know, a bit of this context, I'll try to provide, this context as much as possible. Because amongst other things, I'm a political scientist by training, so we're trained to see things beyond the surface. And so for everything that we see on the news, we are trained to probe, deeper into it, like have a better understanding of why that thing, is occurring, and situate it within historical context. So during the Cold War, the world was basically polarized, between two blocks. We had the Western Bloc and the Eastern Bloc. The Western Bloc was led by the United States of America and its Western allies, and of course, the Eastern Bloc was led by the USSR. Now, at the collapse of, the Cold War, which was about in 1991, with the falling of the, in quote and unquote, Berlin Wall. Okay, most of the countries that made up the East, which was led by the Soviet Union, the USSR, became what we now refer to as the Commonwealth of Independent States, CIS. All right, most of those countries used to be under Russia's purview. They were part of what made up the USSR. Now, with the breaking up of the USSR, or the collapse of the Berlin Wall, these countries became independent states. But most of them, being that they were basically very close to Russia, or they still are close to Russia, and they used to be under Russia, sought to break loose from that influence that Russia had over them. And then they aligned or pitched tent, with the West, again led by the US, capitalism, and of course, in the case of the USSR, it was communism. Okay, so a lot of these countries, went on to cut, or have relationships with the US, and by extension, the US guaranteed some form of protection for them under the North Atlantic Treaty Organization's provisions, which is called NATO. So there's a particular article called Article 5. It's like a security protocol that says that an endangerment to one is an endangerment to all. And so an attack on one is an attack on all. So basically, strategically, this country's decisions to join NATO in many ways was to protect them from external aggression, and also in many other ways, given that they're very small countries, was also to guarantee their the territorial integrity of, or better put, their sovereignty amidst some form of hostility. Now, in the case of Ukraine, okay, Ukraine also is one of these countries, but in the case of Ukraine, the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, okay, for a very long time had been particularly antagonistic about Ukraine joining NATO. Ukraine has always wanted to join NATO like just these other countries, so that, again, like I mentioned just a while ago, its territorial integrity could be guaranteed, in its security pact that would enjoy from Article 5 of NATO would also be guaranteed. But the Russian president in particular now, Vladimir Putin, was keen on ensuring that this wouldn't happen because of the internal politics that was happening within the region at the time. Okay, and he kept making it very clear that he didn't want Ukraine, to join NATO because this is very important. He felt that by virtue of the fact that all these other former countries were already joining NATO meant that in many ways Russia was being surrounded, okay, by Western allies or Western stooges, okay, and so in the event of an attack, Russia would be surrounded. It would be basically, at a disadvantage. So he didn't want these countries to join, but of course he just let that happen. And of course, with Ukraine, he said no, Ukraine was going to happen. Now, a bit of context also, because I'm really taking my time to provide context here. So when I begin to say the things I'm going to say, a lot of it might make a bit of sense. Now, Vladimir Putin is someone who has a background in the KGB. The KGB is the Komitet. It used to what you call the CIA. Okay, Russia's CIA under the USSR. So he's had a lot of access to state secrets. All right, he used to be an operative. So he was one of those who was at the forefront of leaving the era of the Soviet Empire. Okay, imagine him being an operative of the Soviet Empire, and he knew that at the point in time, Russia basked in its glory. Okay, so to see all of that dissipate with the fall of the Berlin Wall was very painful for him personally. Okay, and he always, desired to see Russia, in quote and unquote, go back to its days of glory. Okay, so an encampment by the West and its allies was a direct threat, as far as he was concerned, not only to Russia's own territorial integrity, but to Russia's status, as a global power. All right. Now, having said that, his goal with Ukraine are basically three things. One, to send a strong signal to the West that enough is enough. You can't keep encircling us the way you have done, and I'm not going to allow this happen again with Ukraine. Number two, because of Ukraine's close ties, okay, with the US, he's trying to seek regime change. So regime change is basically a change of government at the Senate in Kiev. That is why he's keen on, if you follow the news just today, he's asked that the Ukrainian military, okay, dislodges their commander-in-chief, that is the president of Ukraine, okay? And then the third thing is also trying to signal to the world is that Russia will not be bullied. Russia will not be intimidated by all this surrounding. And in fact, Russia is back, to being what it used to be, a superpower. Now, if you followed events building up to this time, the US has been accusing Vladimir Putin of trying to reawaken a new Cold War. Now, that Cold War has already been in existence. There's always been tension within the US and Russia ever since the collapse of the Cold War. That tension has always been there, even from the time of President Barack Obama. If you follow the news very well, again, because like I said, I'm trying to give a lot of historical context here. There was a time that there were cases of FSB agents. So FSB is now the precursor to, the successor to the KGB. There were a lot of agents, who were dismissed, from the US diplomats and all of that, who were accused of, being spies, for the Russian Federation. So he's been keen to bring back that glory amidst all of these tensions with the US. And then he eventually decided to take action because he knew that Ukraine hadn't yet formally joined NATO. Okay, so if he had waited for Ukraine to have joined NATO, for instance, then he knows that by virtue of Article 5, all these other countries, including the US, would have to come to Ukraine's aid. So that's the strategic calculation behind what he did. If you need to understand why he attacked when he attacked, okay, because Ukraine has not yet formally joined. That's one. Then number two, another very, very important thing to bear in mind with all that is happening in the region is the fact that some people have asked this question that why wouldn't the US just attack? Because when the US again has said they're not going to, well, technically they've said they're not going to necessarily come to Ukraine's aid, and that's why they've been opting for the options of economic sanctions or targeted sanctions. Now, strategically, in terms of deterrence, Russia has more nuclear warheads than the US. This is the biggest calculation here. So at the end of the Cold War, both countries agreed not to use nuclear weapons after what had happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan during World War II. A consensus was agreed upon that nuclear weapons wouldn't be used during times of war. But as part of the disarmament process, Russia has kept a stockpile in terms of, just for the sake of deterrence, and of course the US has also kept a stockpile. But like I said, in terms of strategic calculations, now this is where a lot of people have asked, why would the US intervene? Russia has more nuclear warheads than the US. So again, to put things into context, you understand why the US will be too keen, to have a confrontation with Russia. Now, beyond all of this, and I begin to wrap up, this is where I'm going to with this conversation. The strategic events that are happening in the region has very little, in fact, to do with the key players there. As strangely as this may sound. And I'd like to say this, that the greatest beneficiaries of what's happening right now are not even in that region. There are two staunch allies of Russia that are going to benefit the most from what's happening. Number one is China. And number two is Iran. Now, if you follow the news again, China has come very heavily to condemn Russia and say, what you guys are doing is wrong and all of that. Well, that's just theory on paper. The truth of the matter is China is very, very likely to benefit from what's happening because as long as the West is engaged and NATO is engaged with Russia in Ukraine, it just makes sense for China to strategically begin to build up towards an attack against Taiwan, a country it's also been very keen on dealing with because of its ties with the US. Now, if you follow what is happening, again, like I said, sometimes you need to see things beyond what's happening. So what's happening in that region is creating a ripple effect. Now, just a few days ago, a lot of fighter jets came into Taiwanese airspace. Chinese fighter jets came into Taiwanese airspace, meaning that the Chinese may be very keen on taking advantage of what's happening in Ukraine to create another ripple effect, since the West is being distracted. Number two, the benefit for Iran, on the other hand, is that with the West being occupied right now with the situation with Russia and Ukraine, it provides Iran a perfect opportunity to accelerate its nuclear program. Okay, one that the US has been very keen on ensuring that Iran does not do because of the prospect of perhaps getting a nuclear bomb. And also, if you've also been following Middle Eastern politics, the greatest threat to the US and Israel's interest in the Middle East is Iran's influence on the region. And now Iran is keen to ensure that the US exits that region so that it can occupy the vacuum that will be created in the region. So beyond all that is happening, don't forget that these two countries are very close allies of Russia. Very close. In fact, Russia is one that basically sponsors a huge chunk of Iran's nuclear program. Again, these are things people are not very aware of, or you don't necessarily see in the mainstream media. Okay, so as long as the West is occupied in that region with Ukraine, Iran is going to be accelerating its own agenda in the Middle East, and China is going to be bracing up towards Taiwan, as they've already done. Like I said, just 3 days ago, they had about, I think, about 15 fighter jets, show demonstration of power towards Taiwan. Now, in all of this, what's the US's position? What's the West's position? Again, there's only so much you can do, because technically, Ukraine has not yet joined NATO. Okay, and a direct confrontation on Russia would have huge consequences globally, especially at the time when the US is, or the world basically is trying to live in a, get used to COVID, or live in a COVID era, and there's a lot of uncertainty, with international economics and all of that. It's only, it only just makes sense that the Western powers tread carefully. And Russia is aware of this, and that's why they also staged the attack they did. They staged the attack they took at the particular point in time that they took it. Now, the last thing I would say as I wrap up is the place of Africa in all of this. The place of Africa in all of this. Now, a lot of African countries in recent times have been courting China and Russia. Again, two very good friends. Okay. Now, the reason why is because most of the time when the West gives you loans, they give you conditional loans. So they tell you, if you're going to take this money from us, you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to devalue your naira, you need to do this, and you need to do that. On the other hand, when China gives you loans, China says, I don't care what you use the money for. If you like, kill yourselves, just give me the energy resources that I require, and that is up to you. So a lot of African leaders, because of the fact that they have sit-tight tendencies and autocratic leanings, prefer to align more with China. Okay? So the proxy war beyond the Middle East that I mentioned already, or what's happening with China and Taiwan, is that there's also a fierce competition for resources in Africa. Okay, and that is why Russia in many ways also needs to signal a strong message to the US that beyond what is happening in Ukraine, we know that strategically your interests are in Africa, and we also have a huge interest in that region alongside China. If you've also been following the news very, very carefully, you see that a lot of African leaders now have been looking to Russia to provide them with some form of military aid through the Wagner Group. The Wagner Group are like mercenaries who come, to the aid of contemporary conventional militaries in Africa. We've seen this already happening a lot in Mali. And then also, if you see what's happening recently, just last week, France announced, an end to Operation Bahrain in Mali as well, simply because Wagner Group was going to be playing a huge role in the security situation. And in fact, again, for some reason, I'm also surprised why this isn't making so much of the news. France has now decided to move to Niger. Okay, Niger. So they moved from Mali, they're now shifting base to Niger, which puts them at just a throws away distance to Nigeria, meaning that they're technically leaving the insurgency in that region and are going to be inheriting a new war with Boko Haram, ISWAP, and Ansar. Okay. Now, the implications of these in international law is that, for instance, if these terrorists move from one country to another, so let's say they move from Niger into Nigeria, under international law, there's what we call hot pursuits. So technically, France can chase them into Nigeria. And then eventually they can have boots on the ground. So, in summary, I don't want to go too deep into so many things, but in summary, what we're seeing is bigger and way more elaborate, than it's receiving media attention. I think I'll just leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Thank you for that. We'll come back to you. Good evening to everyone, and welcome to Newswire Nigeria's Twitter Spaces. We have this every Tuesday and Friday from 7 to 9 p.m., where we discuss people, public, politics, and policy. And today we are discussing the Russia versus Ukraine conflict and its impact on Nigeria. My name is Andy Madaki, and I host on behalf of Newswire Nigeria. Now, we've heard a bit from Paula, and then we've also heard a bit from Kelvin. Now, while it's important and truthful to state that we get a lot of our news from Western media, if you do research and you see reporters from Russian media, for instance, you find out that there are two different sides to this, where everyone obviously is claiming they are right for what they are doing. And so I'm going to come back to Kelvin soon because, for instance, Russia thinks that Ukraine has been stockpiling and buying weapons. And also, they speak about how there's been a war and a blood in Donetsk and Lugansk, which where they broke away from Ukraine, according to them in 2014. And it's been claimed that the West backed this, and while over 13,000 people were killed within that region. Since it's the break of the Soviet Union, they're part of Ukraine, Eastern Ukraine, where they are still largely Russian. And Ukraine, with the Western-backed government, started enforcing policies like changing their national language from Russia by creating new policies and ideologies to push Russia away, Ukrainians who are part of, who ideally were from the USSR and Russia away. And so the Russian government saw it in their own position to defend and support their people within that territory. Now, there's also the conversation about how the world watched what happened in Afghanistan, where the Taliban took over government and the rest of the world watched and rather packed their bags and went away. And so this now comes to ambition, this now comes to economic interest. But also for Russia, and with some of their concerns, they claim that if they let this happen, the proximity between Ukraine and Russia puts them at a security risk. And so, do you feel that the fact that the rest of the world watched while other countries were pretty much imploding, do you feel this is what has emboldened Russia to carry out this operation? Because there were literally no consequences when you see things that have happened in places like Syria, in Afghanistan, and other countries where some of them were even funded and supported allegedly by the Western countries. Do you think this is what has emboldened Russia, or is this just a land grab?
No. So again, I wouldn't say that's exactly what has, emboldened Russia. It might have contributed to it, and of course, again, this is not something that Russia just thought up, overnight. They've been working on this for a very long time. I mean, all the intelligence, according to U.S. national security officials, points to the fact that Russia has been building up, towards this for a long time. Of course, like I also said, if you've been following the news for a very long time, you see that Russia has had this rhetoric on Ukraine for a very, very long time. But again, in terms of maybe Western complacency, perhaps for lack of a better word, yes, they have. That might have contributed in some ways towards what's happening. And I give the example of President Barack Obama's time in office, when he had issued a stern warning to President Bashir Assad, that if there were indications that chemical weapons were being used against Syrians, he would be crossing a red line, and the U.S. would have a responsibility to act under those circumstances. Now, it was deemed that that red line was crossed, but the U.S. didn't act. And again, people have wondered why the U.S. didn't act, against Syria at the time. But let's go back to the fact also that Russia has always been supporting Syria. All right. Now, if you also look at what's happening within the context of Ukraine, you will see that Bashar Assad, who has been in power, who continues to be in power, has also issued a strong statement saying that there's nothing wrong with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, because he's getting his support directly from the Kremlin, all right, which is basically the seat of power in Russia. So you can see that in some ways the West's complacency has emboldened a lot of rogue regimes, and it basically gives the impression that, see, the West will always talk, but they won't take action as long as there aren't any direct consequences for them, or as long as their interests aren't directly threatened. So if you look at Ukraine doesn't have any oil, for instance. People have said Ukraine doesn't have any oil. So the US doesn't necessarily, have any stake in whatever happens in Ukraine, really. And the US has also made it very clear, okay, that, from their actions since the war started, is that they aren't necessarily predisposed to putting boots on the ground. But putting boots on the ground would be a full-blown, all-out war. And so what they've done is to adopt basically targeted sanctions against the regime. That's basically what they have done. Now, again, still speaking of how all of this is linked to the war. So again, I've linked this to China, I've linked it to Iran, and I've linked it also to Syria. But I want to point out something very, very important about the case of Iran. Now, during Trump's administration, okay, the head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, okay, was killed by a drone strike that was ordered by Trump. And the Ayatollahs at the time said, we are going to revenge, but would only revenge at the right time. Now, what's happening in Ukraine could in many ways also embolden the leadership in Iran, because in international relations, if you have an enemy that is bigger than yourself, it doesn't make sense to come head on with that enemy. What you do strategically is you just try to compromise their interest. And so the US's staunchest ally all over the world, and I beg bold to say this, the US staunchest ally all over the world is Israel in the Middle East. So if Iran, for instance, was to, in quote and unquote, teach the US a lesson, it wouldn't go head on with the US. It would simply just try to jeopardize Israeli interests in the Middle East. Okay, and that for me is my concern. With what we're seeing, happening with the crisis with Russia and Ukraine. So the repercussions may not necessarily be within the region, but they may transcend outside the region. We may see Russia trying to undermine U.S. strategic relevance in the Sahel, for instance, or in the Lake Chad Basin, or in the broader African continent, also in the Middle East, or like I said, try to put a lot of strain on countries like Taiwan through China. Now, some other people have also asked, why wouldn't the United Nations Security Council just rise up to the occasion? Well, here's the reason why. Russia is currently the head of the UN Security Council. And these five member countries have veto power, okay? So it's very, very important to understand that Russia has very, very carefully targeted its timing and taking action at this time when it did. It's the head of the UN Security Council right now. It knows that Ukraine is not yet a member of NATO, and so Article 5 may not necessarily apply, and that's why also the West's hands is tied. And more importantly, China, Russia, Iran, and all its other close pals have got its full backing. To the extent, and the ultimate goal, like I've said here, is, which again, Putin came out very clearly to say today, is regime change in Kiev. That is why he's asked the military to dispose their own commander-in-chief. He's literally called for a coup in Ukraine. And once he can get the leadership out of the way, in Ukraine, he can simply put a leader there that will basically do Russia's bidding. And now the implications also for Africa.
I want to interrupt you. Please go ahead. I will come back to the more technical details. In the last 24 hours, at least 2,000 Russians have been arrested because they are protesting against the attack on Ukraine. Currently, as we speak, there are people protesting in Moscow and other parts of Russia. Will you say this is a Kremlin or Putin-based decision, or does this represent the thoughts of the country as a whole, based on the fact that you also raised the background of the fact that Putin was the head of their federal security services, which was the equivalent of our DSS, or the CIA, which the US has. And so, is this personal, or is this a long-term interest in reunionizing the USSR?
Okay, so I'll just quickly provide an answer to that. So yes, definitely there is an agenda to try to bring back to light, the glory days of the Soviet Empire. Is basically trying to, resuscitate that dream, and the fact that the people in Russian citizens are protesting is a clear indication of the fact that this war is unpopular. Okay, now it's an unpopular war, and we know very clearly that Putinism, like I call it, and some other scholars are calling it, Putinism, is simply triumphing over the will of the people. Now, the reason why is because if you've watched Putin's ascendancy into power over the years, he first started as a prime minister. Remember, he was prime minister, and Medvedev was his president. He put Medvedev in power so that Medvedev could hand over to him. And when Medvedev handed over to him, they adjusted the constitution in such a way, or that basically, created a means for him to perpetuate himself in power. So Putin is a seat-tight dictator, no better word. And basically, what's happening in his country right now wouldn't make much of a difference because he used significant control over the state's coercive apparatus. So by coercive apparatus, I mean the intelligence services, the military, the secret police, and all of that. Now, so far, many are going to keep protesting. He's simply going to keep, jailing them and imprisoning them. And if you watched not long ago, just before the invasion, he had an interview. There was a public. There was this video, where he had a public discussion with the head of his intelligence agency, where he was literally talking down on the guy publicly. He was asking him that, are you in support of, Ukraine? Are you saying we shouldn't be doing what we're doing to them, basically? And you could see the guy literally trembling. So when you have all these, when you have the state's coercive apparatus under the firm grip of one man, it may not necessarily make much of a difference if people, are protesting. What will just happen is, unfortunately, you see people people start disappearing overnight, and then that would only instill more fear in the hearts and minds of people, and that in itself would just cause more chaos. But I don't see what's happening within Russia making any significant difference. It's just a question.
Okay. So thank you so much for and Kelvin for your initial thoughts, and we'll come back to you shortly. But we have a couple of people who have their hands raised in the room. Let's hear your thoughts. Please keep it to a maximum of 3 minutes, so we could hear thoughts of other people in the room. If you want to speak, please raise your hands. We will be fact checking. We'll go off give an expert and analytical opinions from an economic angle and from a security angle from the likes of Kelvin and Paula. So we'll start with Ayamo. You've had your hands up. Let's hear your thoughts on this. Then we'll go to Adepoju and then AO. So Ayamo, if you are here, please you can speak.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Fola, for a lot of that insight. So, okay, my name is Emmanuel, right? I'm a pharmacist by profession, but I like to say that pharmacy is my second love. History and international politics is probably my first love. So I would just like to share some other perspective on why all of this is happening. And the what has been in the media majorly has been that Putin is revolting against NATO expansion, right? And a lot of that is true. But I think that also that belies another important reason why this is happening. All right, and this is happening also because Putin is afraid of a democratically successful Ukraine, right? He regards it as a mortal enemy to him keeping power in Russia, and for good reason. He has said that he does not want NATO bringing weapons onto his doorstep and all of that. But I suspect that deep down, Putin realizes that the chances that NATO will attack Russia, right, even if Ukraine joins NATO, is next to zero. And it's next to zero for a few things. One, NATO is a defensive pact. If you do not attack any country that belongs to NATO, NATO has no problem with you. That's one. And two, Russia is a nuclear power. Russia has the most nuclear warheads in the world.
Sorry, I don't know if it's me, but can we hear him?
No, we can't.
Okay, unfortunately, we can't hear you. Kelvin, I'll let you provide feedback on what he has just said, and then we'll go back to our other speakers, Adekunle and AO.
Thank you, Andy. I was going to add to what Fola said. Fola gave a lot of perspective on the reason why we should not see this event as what is currently going on. There is a background to it. As a matter of fact, if you follow international politics very well, you realize that China has actually been a backbone for Russia. And if you look at the fact that in January, Putin went to Beijing to sign a gas contract in euros on the power of Siberia. Russia has been building an underwater gas pipeline called the Power of Siberia 2 to China for some years. That pipeline is completed. It looked like the Nord Stream 2, just that this one is more capital intensive. And so Russia is trying to pivot its economy to China, to insulate it, because basically you have the Dragon Bear countries. Yeah, you have the Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa bloc, and that 5-country bloc control like 40% of global trade. Yeah, and when you look at these dynamics very carefully, you see that Russia, like Fola said, has been angry with the onslaught of NATO trying to come on the eastern flank of Europe, and the ripple effect from the Cold War, USSR, and all of that stuff. So you have a situation where Russia and China are making a move for a global economy that the West, NATO, and its members have controlled for very many years. Now, I'll bring it to Africa so that we understand some implications that this might have on the continent. Take a look at Guinea. Take a look at Congo. I did an article for Africa Report a few months ago where I was talking about how China says, look, we will not be able to compete with Tesla for electric cars, but we will make sure we own the supply chain for EV batteries. And what are the components for EV batteries? Lithium ion ore, cobalt. Cobalt and lithium ion ore are to EV batteries what petrol is to combustion engines. And there's been a serious fight between the US and China for the control of mining sites in Congo especially. If you also look at northern Mozambique, Total discovered a huge gas reserve in northern Mozambique some years ago. They signed like a JV contract with the Mozambican government, started developing sites and building like infrastructure to explore explore the gas. And what has happened is Russia started funding separatist fighters in northern Mozambique, militias, to fight off Total to the point where Total had to pull off from site. And it took the Mozambican president going to Rwanda to meet Paul Kagame to ask the president of Rwanda to bring his army up from Rwanda down the south into Mozambique to fight against these rebels. If you look at Francophone and West Africa, ECOWAS, you look at Mali, like Fola said, you saw weeks ago how a coup was staged in Bamako, and there were serious protests on the French army, Malians asking the French army to leave Mali, and those people are having to move their base down, the French army having to move their base down to the Sahel, north of Borno State, you know. You look at these dual implications, you realize that China and Russia are actually making a play for Africa. Know fully well that Africa has a lot of natural resources, and Africa is the last frontier to global growth. I'll give you an example. Like 10 or 11 years ago, I think I came across a document. Someone showed me a document from CNOOC. CNOOC is a Chinese national oil company akin to what you have with the NNPC in Nigeria. And it was basically talking about the long, like 20-year strategic plan of the Chinese government to get energy independence. And one of the things I saw in that document was that Sinopec, which is one of the major exploration and production companies in China, was going to actually acquire fully ADAX. ADAX is a Swiss E&P in Nigeria. And I think in 2014 or 2013, they went ahead, paid off, and acquired full shares in ADAX Petroleum in Nigeria. ADAX is a very huge oil company, and they have very, very major operations in Nigeria. They bought it over. They also gave, when Hugo Chavez was still alive, $20 billion to the PDVSA. PDVSA is also akin to the NNPC in Nigeria, in exchange for about 400,000 barrels of crude oil a day for 20 years. That was a deal they signed with him. They gave very huge loans, more than $10 billion to the former president of Angola, the one that came, Isabella dos Santos, her father, who was president of Angola. They call it the oil for infrastructure deal. So when you look at China and Russia, the play they have, and you see that Russia has also proposed to the Nigerian government to help Nigeria build their Geopolitical steel mill. And when you look at the numbers, you see that currently Nigeria imports about 8% of the trade between Russia and Nigeria is steel. Nigeria imports steel from Russia. Yeah, 8% of $1.2 billion on a yearly basis. That's the amount of steel Nigeria imports from Russia. And Russia is trying to do like a core investor purchase from the Nigerian government to buy the Geopolitical steel mill. So you look at the economic roadmap, bring all these dots together and see that China and Russia are making a play to create a bifurcation of the global economy, a bifurcation that cuts them away from the IMF, from the World Bank, the Bretton Woods system, where if, for example, the US and its allies decide and say they're going to de-SWIFT China and Russia from the Society for International Financial Telecommunication System, SWIFT, that banks used to communicate and move money daily around the world, they will not be affected. So, for example, yesterday, the Organization for Foreign Asset Control, OFAC, announced that they were going to sanction the two largest banks in Russia, Sberbank and VTB. You know, and a situation like this, where the two largest banks in Russia has been excluded from the financial system, they can come back to fall into a system that they created, right? They're also trying to create like an alternate system for natural resources to have independence and to own a particular supply chain, like I explained, for lithium iron ore and for cobalt.
Sorry to interrupt you, Kevin. I'm sorry to interrupt, and I'll let you go on. But
yes.
And this question is to you. While we see Russia and China trying to expand, especially economically, into Africa, it doesn't reduce the amount of investment the West also brings into the continent. And so when the chips are down, do you think African countries will choose the side of the new money or the ones that have sustained them over time? Or will it now just be a case of who has better warfare capabilities?
Well, that is a very tricky question. And to be honest with you, I won't claim that I have a specific answer to that question. I will just give you point you to the data, so you can build like your assumption on what you think the leaders will do. And of course, you can bet that, for example, I'll give you an example. In Guinea, there was an Israeli businessman called George Steinmeier, and you can Google this up, that was sentenced to about 6 or 7 years at the Swiss court. I think it was 2021 he was sentenced. Basically, what happened in Guinea was that he paid about $160 million as bribe money to a former president of Guinea that later died in power, in exchange for getting mining rights to a very huge mining site in Guinea, a steel mine in Guinea, one of the biggest steel mines in Guinea. And this is a very popular Israeli businessman that has very high connections up to Bibi Benjamin Netanyahu, the former president, the prime minister of Israel. I can't remember if Benjamin still on it. So the point I'm trying to make basically is that Fola talked about how when the World Bank and IMF want to give loans, they give you all kind of preconditions. IMF has a notorious reputation for asking Nigeria to devalue the naira. Even if I don't call IMF for asking the Nigerian government to remove the subsidy on petrol, which is a right move, absolutely, that should have been done 10 years ago. But China, on the other hand, when they come to give you loans, they don't tell you how to do your official and monetary policy. They basically ask you for access to rights, to mining resources or petroleum resources, because they're fighting for their energy independence. So you look at the fact that African governments like what they can hold in their hands. The African leaders, especially, they like what they can. And when you have a situation like that, of course, they will choose countries that prefer to give them bribes and give them kickbacks in exchange for getting licenses and rights to key critical industries. So it's a fight. I don't claim to have the answers to what the governments will do, but I know that it's going to be difficult fighting off people who are willing to bribe their way through or pay major kickbacks to political leaders in exchange for getting what they want to get.
So back to Nigeria, Kelvin. In 1 minute, so we forget some other speakers to talk. How does it affect us, the current conflict?
Well, first of all, you notice that the price of a bushel of wheat has gone up from $280 to about $305 to $310 in the last 30 days, and that's about 13 to 15% appreciation at the IC, which is a lot of move. And this is going to affect the price of bread for bakers in Nigeria, because the price of wheat, the backward integration program that the Flour Mills Association of Nigeria is doing, is going to take another 24 to 36 months for you to begin to see results. And for petroleum products, it's also going to affect the subsidy that the government has to pay. The subsidy might likely go up. Russia has also banned the exports for 2 months. I don't know if they are going to review and also increase the time of that ban. The export of diammonium phosphate, ammonium nitrates, and muriate of potash. These are the raw materials that you need to actually blend fertilizer and urea. In the numbers I have, 1.06% of the ammonium nitrates that Nigeria, of the trade relationship between Russia and Nigeria, goes to the importation of ammonium nitrates, which is what they use to blend fertilizer. So these are the implications. Earlier when I started talking, I talked about that Bosporus channel, that aperture between northern Istanbul and Bulgaria being closed by Turkey. If that happens, what happened to Nigeria in 2009, that the World Shipping Council imposed the World Time Risk Insurance, will happen in the Baltics. They are going to impose a world. If you look at the numbers today, you see that shipping companies are increasing their premiums for moving commodities around the Baltics and the Mediterranean. And they increase the premiums for moving it and impose that World Time Risk Insurance, you're going to see the cost of cargo go up significantly for everybody. And it's going to impact a lot of importers in Nigeria too.
Thank you very much, Kelvin. I see Paula in the audience. It would also be interesting to know how all of this affects the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, depending on how long this goes. But A very good welcome and good evening to everyone who's joining us. This is Newswire Nigeria's Twitter Spaces. We host this every Tuesdays and Fridays from 7 to 9 p.m. where we discuss people, public, politics, and policy. And today we are discussing the Russia versus Ukraine conflict and how it affects Africa and Nigeria. My name is Andy Madaki and I host this for Newswire. We do have people who have sent requests and we'll let as much people as possible to speak. But please keep it to 2 minutes. And we have Paula and Kelvin who will give us economic and security perspectives. So AO, you've had your hands up. Let's hear you and then Adekoju. After that, we'll bring more people up to speak. Good evening, AO.
Good evening. My name is Augustine Okolobi. I'm an economist, an entrepreneur, and analyst. I just enjoy politics and power tussle. Our previous speakers have really given us a history breakdown, which I feel is enough. So I'll move straight to my point. The first issue here is ideology. The NATO and the EU, they are pushing the democratic system of government. And if you check around the world, it is being adopted easily by different nations. Everybody wants to be democratic. Who doesn't want to be free? Everybody wants their votes to count. Then if you check nations like China, Russia, Iran, they don't want that kind of system where people have a say. They want a unitary system or a self-presidential system or a socialist system where the government say is final. So that's one thing they are fighting. I won't talk much around the world. If you also watch the advancing NATO, which is more of a democratic system of governments, is that it's advancing into Africa and Asia, which is actually causing chaos. Like our previous speaker talked about Ukraine, Poland, and if you go to other part like Thailand, what's this country? Hong Kong, in China, and all that. People wanting their voice to be heard, their decisions also to be part of the stake. So this is really causing too much issues around the world. Then I'll talk about the aspect of trade. Whether we like it or not, trade runs the world. Now, Russia is fighting physically, while EU and America and NATO nations are actually hitting them on different financial aspects of trades, economical aspects. Just this evening, I just saw on news, I don't know how true it is, that China just removed their ban on importation of wheat from Russia, which will ease the hard hit of other countries on them, because wheat is actually a major export and source of revenue for Russia. So if you come down to this aspect, technologically, economically, you see military power that these countries like China and Russia, wants to dictate how it's going to go within their region. And countries like that, NATO and EU, wants the people to be involved. We know everybody wins, everybody loses. But this is their fight and this is their issue. Let's bring it down to Africa. Africa is the next place. Within 2020 to 2021, you will see and 2022, you have seen the increased rate of African technologies, different application development, different breakthrough in the tech world. That alone is something everybody is going to fish out for, because they understand African has been in a suffering world, so a lot of problem-solving skills are already here. Then watch what's happening. China is coming into Africa to the extent of establishing a military base. Russia now is interested in Africa. Whether you like it or not, uranium is found highly in Africa presently, and that is one of the mineral resources used for a nuclear weapon. And Africa is growing technologically wise. If, for example, Africa can develop most of all these weapons and they have the natural resources, what are we talking about? Africa is going to come into the world table of negotiation. And nobody will let that happen easily, because even the NATO, even EU, everybody has undermined Africa. But because of internet and the access to information, a lot is happening nowadays. The normal man or the normal guy who does not have much knowledge can build something from nothing, and someone from this country will pick him, from the Western world will pick him out of Africa. So if Africa is left to develop itself, there will be problem. China is already in, Russia is coming in, the US and Europe nations are already in. that means what? Everybody is coming for Africa, which means the next war zone will be Africa. Aside from this, climate change is a big deal. And one of the places to really sustain this climate change also is Africa, because of its nature, its agricultural nature, where you can farm and good resources it can grow. Everybody needs a backup to feed his country. Then when we talk about the population in Africa, trade, everybody wants a market in Africa and everybody wants to be a stakeholder in Africa. So which means coming to Africa to develop this commodity, you sell to Africa and you export out of Africa. And they understand the fact that African governments are not ready for this. So the faster they take stakes and hold their stakes, the better for them. This leads me to questions and answers that I have this to make all of us understand the fact that Africa as a nation is a nation that actually exports only raw commodity. If you check China, Russia, and some of the EU nations, they export valued commodity. Meaning they are coming here to convert most of all these our raw materials into valuable commodity, just like what they did with crude oil. For long, Africa has not been able to establish a sound refinery to refine its crude oil. Now Dangote is coming to establish it after how many years? But they are coming to establish other factories to help us refine our raw materials and export them as what finished product, which we yield to more cash. We don't have grip. Industrialization is not functioning here. So these are the key things we should check. Aside from looking at the benefits, we should look at the ending. Secondly, this issue of Russia and
sorry, just because of time, can you keep it to about 30 seconds, just so we could hear some of that. But your points are valid and taken into consideration, I'm sure, but just so we could go around a little bit.
Okay, no problem. In rounding up, the truth is everybody needs to be on the table, both Africa, both Europe, both Russia, both Asia. But Africa is missing on the table, and this is what I fear. We don't have a stake, so it means anybody can come in and take us for granted on what they want. We might be seeing the next invasion for next slavery. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Adepoju, you've had your hands up, so let's hear Adepoju. After that, we'll hear from Sarah.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity. So, I'll go straight right to the point. Fola and Kelvin have done justice to the issue about NATO and Russia issue. But something is missing here, which is people are not looking at it from the US perspective. Whether Russia invades Ukraine successfully or not, I think the US has made its point known, is that they don't want a relationship between Russia and the EU countries. For example, the gas pipeline, which is the Nord Stream, US has been antagonizing the plans of the expansion of the gas stream between EU nations and Russia, because they feel that is a threat to the US economy, because obviously the EU nations rely on US for security and economic reasons. So, and also let's not forget the US is the reserve currency, the world reserve currency, and they see it as a threat because Russia has close ties with China, and if the EU, through the Nord Stream gas, there will be a form of relationship between the EU and Russia. Because of that, US will be cut off from the economy or trade the stuff. Yeah, sorry. So US wants to have a grip on the EU nations. They want to put their hands in all those things so that they can have a stand on all of this, including trade. So I think that the US has achieved its objective by instigating this war structure that just happened with the Ukrainian government by changing the regime that happened in 2014. So I feel that the US has done that aspect, and now you can see that the EU nations are sanctioning Russia. They're pulling off trades, and that works for the interest of US. That's US best interest for that to happen. So in the long run, this thing comes as interest. every country has interest in whatsoever. So what Russia and China are trying to do is to take off that currency dependence on US to the yuan or what's it called or the euros. But US doesn't want that to happen. So you can see the US expanding its bases NATO into 30 countries now, and doing that, they almost included Ukraine in the NATO alliance, but it was kicked off initially by Germany and France. That was when Angela Merkel was in power. She kicked it off like no, like Ukraine can't be included in NATO because they know the consequences of that happening. But the US has always been doing a whole lot of things to put in this package in play just to remove Russia and China from the table. So I guess I feel that what is really happening right now. So I guess that.
Yeah, thank you.
Hello?
Yeah, so thank you very much for your point. I think it can't be overemphasized. Thanks for your contribution. I don't know if you're finished, but I would like to bring Sarah and then after nationalists to share their own.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Are you done? Okay. Hello, Sarah. Okay, if we don't have Sarah, African nationalist, the mic is yours, you can speak. Okay, we have Sarah now. Hi, Sarah. What are your thoughts on this conversation?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Sorry, I was trying to keep up with some of the friends we have in Ukraine. So I just want to tell everybody right now, Romania is already taking in Nigerians. I don't know what the ambassadors have done now, but they're currently Nigerians. So if no one wants to go in, they can go in right now because from reports that we're hearing, it's getting quite worse. So one thing I actually wanted to say is I'm quite surprised that the entire Africa is silent. Everybody in Africa, all African leaders have been quite silent, which is very, very disturbing. Looking at the facts of the impact this will also have on us. I mean, the war in Ukraine could have a big devastating effect on all African states because it's going to strengthen our economies. And also seeing the fact that every African government is actually under a huge diplomatic pressure just because they want to see the sides that we are taking. They want to know the side you are taking. They want to know the side South Africans are taking. They want to know the side the Ghanaians are taking because what we actually have to say or our impact also matters. If they want to cut out Russia, especially to the fact that they are one of the world's biggest gas supplier, Nigeria is going to be one country that they could actually look at and say, okay, supply for us. But we're not even doing anything. We're not saying anything. And what is even more piecing is to the fact that we're not even helping our own citizens in this country. For the fact that every single world leader or African leader is quiet about this issue should actually give you a little bit of reasoning to want to see why, as to why, like what's the reason. And the only reason I can actually think of is to the fact that maybe they're afraid. And I don't know why they're afraid. I mean, if we have built our military and if we've built our economy to a very high standing, I don't see a reason why we should be afraid. Currently, Russia is already threatening Finland. And Finland has joined, they've actually they're looking at joining NATO right now. And even the meeting they just had, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson was there. Icelandic Prime Minister, the Katrin Jakobsdottir, she was also there. The Norwegian Prime Minister Jonas Gahr was also present. Danish Prime Minister was also present to the NATO meeting that they just had an hour ago. Surprisingly, the Finnish President Sauli Niinistö was also present in the meeting. The Swedish Prime Minister was also present. This should tell you that everyone is actually joining NATO, right? So the reason why Russia is invading is because they know that they need to get that nation, but they cannot get it if everybody comes together to say, okay, this is actually wrong. But no one is actually making any statement, especially from Africa. Nobody's saying anything. Are we going to just sit down and watch it happen, or are we going to start talking about it and try to see how we can help, especially for Nigerians that are there. There are a lot of Nigerians currently in Kyiv, and the train stations in Kyiv, they are not even allowing people to board, especially Africans. I don't know. Some people are trying to look at it as a racist act. Some people are saying the bus or the train stations are actually looking at evacuating Ukrainians first. But no matter what it is, or no matter the situation on ground, if the Nigerian government and the Nigerian leaders are not saying anything or doing anything, the world cannot assist us. The world cannot help us because we are not helping ourselves. Nigerian students are currently, as I'm speaking to you, traveling from Kharkiv to Uzhhorod via Kyiv. And that place is actually, it's deadly because they are currently even bombing. And the Poland, the Poland, they're not even taking us right now because they are saying they have COVID concerns. But if they have COVID concerns, why are they taking other people and not even taking? It's just 50% of the Polish people that have taken their vaccines. So if they're saying it's because of the COVID concerns, then I wouldn't buy that. It's just because our government haven't done anything. They haven't reached out to the Polish. So if we're looking at all these implications, or we're looking at the issues that we're supposed to be looking at right now, it's because every single person and every single leader, especially the leaders that we have in Nigeria, are not doing anything about it. So what are we supposed to be doing? Number one, our leaders are supposed to be speaking up. And number two, another thing that we're supposed to be.
Are you there, sir? I don't know. Sarah's gone up. Sarah, if you're there, you can unmute yourself with you. But while we wait, African nationalists, what's your own view on this conversation? After that, we'll have to cover.
All right. Thank you very much. With respect to the war in Ukraine, Russia, the truth is that I don't really care about what's happening in Ukraine and Russia. Why I don't care is because Nigeria have been fighting Boko Haram, ISWAP, bandits. Nobody care about us. Nobody has come to even help us with weapons. We have to buy weapons. What I really care about is Nigeria and Nigerian unity. I think the biggest problem in Nigeria is lack of unity and ignorance. Nigeria have been brainwashed not to believe in Nigeria. All right? And one big problem we have in Nigeria and Africa is actually capital. You see, the way the global economy is run, natural resources are in Africa, but natural resources is useless without capital. So, but these capitals are in the Western world, the United States, Russia, all of them, they have the capitals. And the reason why they have the capital is because they actually create the capital. Dollar is created in the United States, euro is created in Europe. And they made this currency the dominant currency. Our own currency is not dominant. So they can decide to print as much as they want, use the money to create companies and bring it down to Africa and invest. But we don't have that advantage. So that's the reason why Africa is having issues. That's the reason why we cannot industrialize. We don't have the capital. We have the resources, but we don't have the capital to industrialize. But there's a way out for us in Africa. Even if we don't have the capital to industrialize, there's another way out. If we can be united and we work together, we can start building things. Then we begin to attract the capital from the Western world down to Africa. Because if you observe something, all the Western giants are all coming here to start their company. But there's a problem. We're not united. We're always having one crisis or the other. We're always at war. In Nigeria, you have Biafra movement, militancy movement, every kind of... Yes, I can hear you. Yes.
I hear you speak about how Africa isn't united, and we've had conversations about opening borders and the like, but we do have the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. Wouldn't you say that is progress which would help build African economies and not necessarily relying on being united for us to get money from the West? Don't you say some effort is being made at all?
Yeah, it's true. An effort has been made. Okay, okay, fine. Africa is trying, we're making some efforts. But the truth is that even if you do a free trade system, the African free trade in Africa, right? It's not about the trade, it's about the currency. What currency is involved in that trade? See, that's the issue. Because as long as that currency is in dollars, we will continue to have issues. Because it means that we have to go and collect loans to make all those trade work. You understand what I'm saying? There can never be any trade, any effective trade, if the trade is done in Western currency and not our currencies. Because if the trade is done in our currency, we have enough to expand the trades. But as long as the trade is done in Western currencies, it limits our ability to expand.
African nationalists.
Yes.
I want to thank you for your passion for Nigeria and Africa, but I would like to also reel this back to the topic of this conversation. And welcome to everyone who has just joined us. But if you'll give us some minutes, let's get some other people to speak. So we may come back to you if we've got time. But I want to go back to Fola and Kelvin with two different questions. And Fola, please answer this in 2 minutes.
All right.
With what's going on around the world, we've seen what has happened we've seen China, Taiwan, we've seen Russia, Ukraine, we've seen what has happened in Afghanistan. From a security perspective, bringing this back to Nigeria, do you feel things like this will embolden local agitation? And if we are all for Russia leaving Ukraine alone, should we be having a different argument in Nigeria from a security perspective?
Okay, thank you very much, Andy, once again. So again, these events are not in any way isolated. They have repercussions, for how state society relations, are conjured going forward. But it's also imperative to note that the underlying circumstances have defined what we're beginning to see with the Russian-Ukrainian crisis is in many ways unique and not necessarily what you call a one-size-fits-all, for the agitations in Nigeria, for instance, or in other parts of Africa. Again, in the case of Russia and Ukraine, it's a sort of provocation. Okay, and this provocation is basically built on ideology between capitalism and communism, or like I mentioned earlier, like a reawakening of the Cold War, as it were. Whereas in places like Nigeria, some of the agitations you are seeing are mostly rooted or are underpinned in what I call to basically marginalization. All right, marginalization, because a lot of people in some parts of the country where you have people agitating because they feel they have been marginalized politically, and so they need to be able to reclaim, their voice or give expression to their political interests. Whereas in the case of Ukraine and Russia, it's simply just one big bully, trying to suppress a country it feels shouldn't be able to make its own political decisions. But whether or not it will embolden people or groups in Nigeria, like I said, it may be a bit far-fetched, given that the circumstances are a bit different. But that's not also to say that groups wouldn't, try to rise up to the occasion and try to make some sense of this, or try to, situate their agitations around it. But again, the context is a bit different, and so it's more or less political ideology over issues of political marginalization. So they're quite distinct.
Thank you very much for that. So just before we let Chika speak, Funmilayo, I see you have some information for Nigeria and in Ukraine. Please, you can speak.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So, thank you, Mr. Fola and Kelvin, for such insightful discussion. So yes, you can look on the jumbotron up there, and you can join this group that Phoenix and Michael has created. And what we are doing in the group is literally trying to figure out how to get people out of Ukraine. So some people were able to get to Moldova this afternoon in Ukraine time. The border is they're accepting Nigerian scholars to come to pass through, even if you don't have the COVID requirement and your passport is not even with you. They're taking people into Moldova on humanitarian ground. Same with but I think the major problem people are having is we have a lot of people at the border in Poland, but this is for Sarah. Actually, Nigerian government the embassy is actually doing something for the very first time. And I must say, I'm not a fan of Nigerian embassies all over the world, but for some miraculous reason, they're actually doing something this time around. So they are in talk with the Polish government, trying to get them to sort out the issue to get Nigerian citizens that are actually at the border to be able to cross in. And what that we got this afternoon was that that they are actually treating them nice, and some were turned back initially, but now they're giving them blankets, all of that stuff, even at the border while they sort the issue out. I think one of the main issues that they're having is the COVID-19 clearance, something like that they must have that before they come into Poland. So if anyone is here that can amplify this even further, to make sure that Nigerian embassy actually completes this assignment, would be really, really wonderful. A lot of, like, I put up information up there. There's a number, Dr. Tade, Remy. These guys are already in Poland and ready to take on Nigerians as they cross the border. So if you're in Ukraine and you're able to cross into Poland, please call these numbers. They're going to give you accommodation, food, clothing. So people in Poland, some Nigerians in Poland have actually started making makeshift rooms in their house to accommodate the people coming in from Ukraine. So please, if you're able to go into Poland, please call these numbers. They will be definitely there to help you. I think people are actually going from Moldova to Romania as well. The trains are working from there, but we have people at the airport, at the train station right now in Kyiv. Presently, the trains have stopped working completely, not because they don't want to take anyone, but because there was an attack on a train station. And I'm not sure exactly where, but the train drivers, attendants, got injured and all that stuff. So they had to stop the trains from moving right now, because we have a lot of people in Kyiv trying to get on the train to get out, but they shut down the train stations currently because they're trying to assess the situation, whether it's safe for them to still have people get on the train to continue their journey. So we have people like, just let us, if you can pray. If you are a Muslim, please pray. Just let's pray for our folks. A lot of, like, I'm seeing pictures. So I'm in the support group and people are dropping pictures, and their kids in jackets. You know how cold, it's freezing cold in Ukraine right now, and there are kids at the train station just waiting to get out. Like, let's just send them prayers. There's really not much we can do, especially since Ukraine is not part of NATO. So because I've been so agitated all day trying to understand why the allies haven't moved in. I've checked. I see that Finland to Ukraine is about 26 hours, because I'm even trying to see, because I have folks in Finland that can actually take people in, but it's way too far to even get on the road to travel to Finland currently. So I pray that the United States, in the European Union, whatever it is, eventually by tomorrow, steps in, because things are really getting really, really crazy right now. It's really, really a mess. So, that's just my 2 cents. Please, let's just keep. We can't say it's on our business. It's this right now. There's a lot of students, a lot of Nigerians in Ukraine that are stranded. Let's just keep them in our prayers. Let's pray that a miracle happens between now and tomorrow, and they're able to pass through and get out. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fumilayo and Sarah. I hope you also are staying safe as you try to help other people. Please let us know how this goes, and you can always DM Newswire. Also, I want to throw a little shade by saying it's good to see young Nigerians doing the work which is expected of our foreign affairs ministry and their communication, because this is information people need to know. One of the conversations we had before starting this room was the fact that a lot of Nigerians, a number of Nigerians go to Ukraine to study medicine and to go to university. And so we can't pretend this doesn't affect us, even if not in Nigeria directly, but one life matters. So thanks to Kumilayo and Sarah for coming up here and giving solutions and ways to help. We do appreciate it. We'll hear from T-Craft, then Aura. But to everyone just joining us, good evening. This is Newswire Nigeria. And we have the Twitter Spaces every Tuesdays and Fridays from 7 to 9 p.m. So it's the first icon at the top left side of your screen. Please follow to join the conversation. And today we are discussing the Russia versus Ukraine conflict and how it affects Nigeria and Africa. Tika, let's hear your take then, Aura, and we'll bring more up to speak.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Quite an insightful room of space, and thanks to Paula and Kelvin. I listened to a whole lot that you guys talked about, and I would want to speak as regards what African Nation says, but I don't want to digress. The main thing I want to do is actually bring questions that I have bugging my mind, because listening, I'm learning a lot of things, but I want to ask some questions, Paula, precisely. So I read about the Article 5, which says if you touch one NATO member, it means you have touched all of us. Now, if, which is not most likely to happen, if say America and the other NATO member countries decide to join in, which is not likely to happen, like I said, do you think Putin, having thought about this before now and went ahead to do what he is doing as it is? Now, secondly, now the sanctions that the U.S. is trying to put in place to stop Russia or Putin, do you think those sanctions are strong enough? And in totality, what are those sanctions for a lot of people that don't know what really those sanctions mean? What are those sanctions, and how can they further tame Putin in all that he's doing? Now, the third question I want to ask is, Zelensky right now is more or less...
You have asked 3 questions. So...
Okay, I would like to join you. So the last one is Zelensky. He's more or less in the middle of this whole thing. What would you think would be the right direction for him to take? Is it going ahead to fight heads on, which we know geographically he stands no chance with Russia and even power and all of that? So what would you think would be the right direction to gravitate towards? Thank you, Paula.
Thank you very much, T-Cap. I would like Kelvin to actually answer those questions. Kelvin, are you there?
Hi, Andy.
Yes.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Article 4 and 5, and then talk more about the sanctions and what the impact will be. Article 4 basically says that NATO members, there are 27 NATO members. The US contributes 22% of the budget of NATO on a yearly basis. And Article 4 basically says that NATO members that feel threatened are obligated to call for an extraordinary meeting to trigger Article 5. Article 5 says that the NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, is obligated to bring all its armory and its military, both from the sea, from the air, from the ground forces, to defend its members, 27 of them, against any external aggression. And you can see that the Kremlin released a statement earlier today that says, the spokesperson said that Finland and Sweden should be on high alert about their consideration to join NATO in light of what is happening. Because if you look at the map of the Baltic states, you see that Finland is actually located somewhere around Ukraine. So definitely Finland is threatened. And, you know, these are the implications you have, that some of the member states that share common borders with Ukraine and Russia that feel threatened by this war going on currently are bound to most likely call an extraordinary general meeting and trigger Article 5. I'm going to talk about the sanctions. Even if I talked about it earlier when I was speaking about Sberbank and VTB. VTB, by the way, has an office in Nigeria and Lagos. VTB is the second largest bank in Russia. Sberbank is the largest bank in Russia. Sberbank controls like 30% of all the transaction volume in Russia, in the banking sector in Russia. A little over $1 trillion. And both of them, VTB and Sberbank, has like $42.9 billion of transaction volumes on a daily basis. Now, yesterday, the US Treasury announced that they were going to, OFAC was going to seize assets of the banks in the US. OFAC was also going to restrict Office of Foreign Asset Control. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, I can hear you, Calvin.
So OFAC, the US Treasury sent like a request to OFAC to restrict the daily deal flow of Sberbank. Sberbank is the largest bank in Russia, and VTB. You can see also that the British Prime Minister announced at Parliament yesterday that he was going to ban Russian banks from having access to the city of London. By the way, the city of London does about $600 billion in daily transaction volumes. It was going to ban them entirely and restrict all Russian nationals, have limits on how much they can have in UK banks. And so a few days ago, I think 3 days ago, I predicted that the current owner of Chelsea, Roman Abramovich, who has been a long-time ally of Vladimir Putin, is going to come under fire. And right now, there are talks about the government possibly nationalizing it. In 2019, Theresa May, when she was prime minister, kicked out Roman Abramovich and declared him persona non grata because of a particular incident on former KGB agent in London. So, looking at all of this, the most powerful headline I saw today for me is that Germany, as I yesterday was saying that Germany, Cyprus, and 2 other countries were saying that they were opposed to the US and the UK and other EU members, and Boris Johnson has really been firm on having the SWIFT system, which is a Society for Worldwide International Financial Telecommunications, like a SWIFT that the banks have. It was started by 293 banks in Belgium 30 or 40 years ago. I can't remember the exact year. And right now, there are quite a number of banks on that network, over 11,000 banks globally on that network. So basically, let me give you a little perspective. When you send money from your Standard Chartered in Nigeria to a Citibank in London, the SWIFT system is what helps the banks to communicate between themselves to debit money from one to a corresponding bank off to the receiving bank. And basically, Boris has been pushing for Russia to be totally annihilated from that system and de-SWIFTed, removed, so that Russian banks will not be able to communicate with all the banks in the world. Germany, Cyprus, and 2 other countries have been opposed to it. But today, the Prime Minister of Germany, Olaf Scholz, came and said that he's going back on that decision and he has changed his mind. And that the Bundestag, which is German parliament, is actually considering going ahead with other countries like the UK and the US to actually remove Russia from the SWIFT system. For me, if that happens, that is going to be extreme pain. I feel that is like the most significant weapon of sanction that the G7 has against Russia. And it's also typical, in closing, in yielding the mic back, it's also topical to mention that today, Russian war vessels actually sent a missile and bombed a civilian cargo ship, a Japanese civilian cargo ship in the Odessa Sea, in the Black Sea. And the reason they did that was because yesterday, Japan announced that they were on board with the US and the UK and the European Union to actually sanction Russia. And the US President Biden says that he's going to make sure that Russia is not able to transact in yen, in euros, and in US dollars. And if you go back to the fact that when I started earlier, I talked about the Power of Siberia 2, the gas pipeline that Russia built all the way to China. That contract that China signed with Russia was denominated in euros and not US dollars because they saw this day coming. But now, if they do SWIFT and Russia, and then they can't transact in euro, they can't transact in yen, they can't transact in US dollars, and they can only transact between the Russian ruble and the Chinese yuan, then it's going to create a real problem for Russia, and it's going to cause real pain. I don't know how Putin intends to get away from that. Thank you.
Okay, well, you
thank you, Kelvin. Olafalaye, let's hear you, then we'll come back to Sarah because you were speaking earlier and we lost her. So, Olafalaye.
Thank you very much, Andy, and fantastic presentation by Kelvin and Fola. Just to add a little bit to what Kelvin just said about all the questions that what's the name, Krauts asked about the sanctions. I think Kelvin's dealt with it, and like he said, the most important bit, which is the SWIFT, that is being considered now by Germany. Yes, the UK has been on and on about it for about 3 days, but what I would just like to add to that is that currently in the UK, our Prime Minister is under a little bit of pressure, and if not for the pressure being put on him by the oppositions, the sanctions being proposed by the UK government was not going to touch the rights people. And even right now, the list of the people that has been mentioned in the sanctions are not the actual 35 on the Magnitsky Act. And it's only due to pressure that they now started to talk about Roman Abramovich, because they know he's a very close ally and holds a lot of money for Putin. Basically, that's what the oligarchs are. They're just like holding money for Putin. Putin is considered to be the richest man on earth based on the number of oligarchs that are betrothed to him. So packing that to one side, the Russia-Ukraine, the impact on Nigeria, I actually jotted down some lines. How does it impact Nigeria? And the very first one I put down was the Nigerians in Ukraine and the Eastern Bloc studying, and I'm so happy that Fumilayo mentioned the efforts being done. The lady that was Sarah that was saying the Nigerian government is not doing anything. That's not true. The Nigerian government is actually doing a lot behind the scenes, and kudos to individuals like Fumilayo and the people she's put down on the list that on the tweets that she shared. That's one big impact of this conflict happening on Nigeria and basically Africans, all Africans in the Eastern Bloc. That's sort of impact. The other impact is not just limited to Nigeria. The other negative impact is not limited to Nigeria, is inflation to the whole world. Right now, Britain is, or the whole of the world, the Western world, are going through high inflation. The RPI in the UK as of last month was 7.5. Salaries are not going up more than the average salary increment is about 4.1. So you can see where I'm going with that. Purchasing power has been reduced. So that's what we've been dealing with before this war broke out. Energy costs in Britain went up by 56%. By April, my energy bill from 1,200 is going to go up to 1,950. So that is before this war started. Now with this war, it's definitely going to go higher. So that inflation is going to affect the whole world. How does that affect Nigeria? Petrol, the barrel of oil is gone up for the first time since 2014. It's gone up over $100 per barrel. Obviously, importing finished product to the petrol, PMX to Nigeria or diesel is going to go up. So NNPC even though it's partly private now. After the PIB, they're going to be spending more money on subsidy for PMS. Thank God, AGO is on subsidy, which is diesel. Then another thing, the project. There was a program by Ajuri Ngilali where he talked about the Ajaokuta steel industry that Nigeria is in negotiation with Russia to finish it off and let Nigeria start producing. I think Kevin has talked a lot about that steel. Now that is going to go on the back burner because Russia is now under a lot of sanctions. Nigerian banks, just like Kevin has just explained, will not be able to do business. The Nigerian government will not be able to do business transacting dollars with the Russian counterparts that are supposed to help get Ajaokuta to the finish line. So that's another delay. That's another big problem for Nigeria. We'll continue to import steel. That's another minus for our economy. Grains. I follow quite a lot of Nigerian farmers on Twitter. They always talk about the grains they use for their feeds, for their animal feeds and stuff. Ukraine is, I think, the second largest grain producer in the world. Now they're going through this war. There's going to be a shortage of grain. We're already seeing bread going up in the UK. We're already seeing all sorts of things. So it's going to happen. It's going to affect. Yes, we must say it's Ukraine-Russia war. This is going to affect the whole world. There's no part of the world that it will affect. But on the good side, there are some positives. Oil price, like I said, is a positive. Barrel of oil price going up is a positive for Nigerian coffers. We'll make more money. Gas. Now, Kevin has already explained it. The Nord Stream 2 and others that China, Russia supplies Europe. 40% of European oil comes from European gas come from Russia, and Russia has always wielded that as a stick over Europe. Yeah. Yes.
I'm going to just interrupt you for a quick fact check. Calvin, will this increase in oil from Nigeria? Hello, Calvin.
I didn't hear you, Andy.
I said, will this, according to what Ola has said, do you think this increase in oil prices will it benefit Nigeria or affect
barrel of oil? I said though, barrel of oil.
No, not you. Okay, yes, but how you say this will benefit Nigeria? So I want Kevin to fact check that.
Well, to be honest with you, you have to understand that the Senate benchmark for crude oil this year was about $62 per barrel, and the cost of production for a barrel of crude oil is somewhere between $22 and $26 per barrel, and now anything above $62 goes into what they call excess crude accounts, ECA, which is not appropriated into the Consolidated Revenue Fund and is solely at the discretion of the National Economic Council. So basically for me, I don't see the difference because anything above the budget benchmark actually goes to the ECA. And that ECA...
Yeah, but that's more money to
not
because, isn't it?
Well, look, in the last between 2007 and 2022, the excess crude accounts has gotten over $100 billion US. What has the Nigerian government done with it? That's a question we have.
Good question. Yeah, those are the questions we can ask. But it doesn't say that we don't have that money.
It doesn't say we don't have it, but it's not sent to the Consolidated Revenue Fund. And the Appropriation Act for 2022 has a 6 trillion naira budget deficit. So how can you have budget deficit of 6 trillion naira and you don't want to send the excess crude account revenues to the CRF?
Those are very good questions to ask, but doesn't negate the fact that money is...
It doesn't negate it. It doesn't at all.
Yeah, so it's a question that this is the kind of information that should be out there, that government is earning more than...
It's earning, but it's not using the money to do...
But what are they using the money for exactly? So those are questions that can be asked, but it doesn't negate the fact that it's a fact that you've earned more than you budgeted.
I actually think this should be one of the talking points during the elections in 2023. The voters should ask the politicians who are running for office what they intend to do with the ECA. Either you collapse it into the CRF or you collapse it into the sovereign wealth fund.
Into the sovereign wealth fund. Fantastic. So those are the kind of questions. So that's a positive. In my book, it's a positive for Nigeria that we are building an ECA. So what's that ECA going to be used for, or has it been accounted for? I
don't think it's a positive. I'll tell you why I don't think it's a positive. Between 2007 and 2017, the ECA got $84 billion. Between 2010 and 2015, the ECA got $44 billion. That money is not accounted for.
Yeah, and those are fantastic questions to ask. And when you talk about individuals having billions of naira in their account or millions of dollars in foreign accounts, you see where the money has gone. So we can now hold this.
So Kevin and Ola, let me ask you a question an average Nigerian would ask. Look, how does this affect the GDP or not?
No, it should affect, in my opinion, it should affect the GDP in that you've got this money sitting somewhere that is not accounted for. So if the people, like Kevin, who is an economist, and in fact, if the opposition in Nigeria was good at their job, these are the kind of questions that should be asked and accounted for going forward. That, okay, you've earned this much. Okay, we know about the ones we earned before you came into power that we can't account for, or you've now shown that they were stolen. Now, the ones you've earned, what have you done with it? Or where is it sitting? So that's the job of opposition.
Well, to answer your question, Andy, I don't think it improves the GDP because if you look at the 40-year historical curve of the per capita income of Nigerians, it stayed at between 2,000 and 2,100 US dollars. That is very, very low. If you look at the chart of per capita income globally, Nigeria is very, very low. Nigeria is at the bottom of the per capita index globally. So I don't think you having a differential in difference between the benchmark that the Senate sets and the current price at the IC impacts on the well-being of Nigerians. And you have a budget deficit, for Christ's sake. The government has to borrow or create supplementary budgets to fill his deficit. The Federal Inland Revenue Service is not projected to do more than 6.5 to 7 trillion naira in 2022. And you have 6 trillion naira in deficit. So why would you have income and not make use of it?
So to round up my positive, Andy, I would say another positive 10 seconds. Another positive is the supply of gas to Europe. Eventually, when everything settles down and Europe is in for a long haul, they would have to source for gas from somewhere. That could be a plus.
Ola, I'm just going to, in closing tonight, I'm going to talk about what I talked on Silverbird TV this morning about the NMGP and the Trans-Sahara briefly. This is the time. Unfortunately, this is not an opportunity Nigeria can take advantage of because building like a gas pipe on the sea, like China did, Russia did to China, is not something you can wake up and just do. It's not 5 or 6 years of real planning and implementation. Now, King Abdullah, the king of Morocco, came to Nigeria a few years ago. I don't know if it was 2017 or 18. And he basically proposed to the sitting president, that look, I want to join ECOWAS. And because Morocco exports, earlier I talked about some of the things Morocco exports to Nigeria, ammonium nitrate gas. And he says that he wants to do like a bilateral plan to build like a Nigerian-Moroccan gas pipeline from all the way from Bonny and Akwa Ibom, both rivers and Akwa Ibom states, all the way down to Morocco, and then pipe it to Spain. And if we're taking it seriously then and really worked at it, Algeria also proposed the same thing, you know. I think by now they'll be taking advantage of the problem that Russia has with Western and other parts of Eastern Europe, Nigeria has a chance to actually earn up to $20 billion from gas. Because liquefied natural gas, LNG, is more expensive to explore. And for you to use LNG, you have to first liquefy the gas after it, explode, and then transport the gas, and it's more delicate to transport. When it gets to the site of your buyer, they have to deliquefy it before they use it. So pipe gas is cheaper than LNG, and this is the time. Like the Chinese will say that the second best time to start is today. This is the time for Nigeria to take it seriously again, because gas provides an opportunity not just to earn revenues, but also to create a foreign policy and have leverage. And currently, Nigeria doesn't have any leverage. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for explaining that, Andy. And any which way I look at it, I see as a cop out for and Nigeria can take advantage going forward.
Thank you very much, our speakers. So, Wendy, let's hear your take on this conversation. Then we'll come back to Sarah.
Good evening, everyone. My comment was actually to respond to what an earlier speaker mentioned concerning Ukraine and its NATO membership. My comment is that currently NATO's agreement, they have like prerequisite conditions for a state being able to become a member of NATO, and Ukraine has been unable to join the organization because of it has not met these requirements, which includes not having any insurgency or any conflict, internal conflict in its own state. So I'm just throwing light on my own personal opinion about the conflict. So Russia using the perceived threat of Ukraine's membership to NATO as a justification for the invasion, it's quite baseless and really does not hold much water. So that's all I want to say. I know I digressed a bit from the current line of discussion. So yeah, thank you.
No, thank you very much, Wendy. We do appreciate your contribution. Funmilayo, I'll give you the mic. Do you have any update for us on and for Nigerians in the region?
Yes, so if you go on this, the Jumbotron I just posted like that I have up there, Whisper Raw is his handle. He's currently in his space. He's actually a representative on behalf of, I think, the embassy, and like a liaison between the embassy in Poland and the community leaders in Poland trying to help Nigerians. So he's actually hosting a space right now. I'm actually going to be stepping out of this room because I actually am in America and I'm just trying to do my path as a Nigerian to help people. So I want to go hear what updates they've gotten in regards to getting people into Poland. So that's the update I have. I just got a thing. He just sent me a link now that he's hosting space with more information.
Thank you very much, Funmilayo. Ismail Sari. We are discussing the Russia versus Ukraine conflict and the impact on Nigeria and Africa. What's your perspective on this conversation? Ismail. Okay, and if Ismail isn't ready, African nationalists, you have your hands up. What do you want to say?
All right. I just wanted to talk to Kevin. I noticed that Kevin is a very, very knowledgeable economist, and Kevin has a very powerful voice on Twitter Space, and he's very knowledgeable. But I just want Kevin to understand that Nigeria is a very, very volatile country right now. And we talked about the fact that because of the Ukraine crisis, the price of oil rose to 100. Okay, but Kevin was pessimistic. I didn't like the fact that Kevin was being pessimistic there. I like the fact that the host was able to try to fight Kevin's pessimism. All right. What Kevin should be saying here is that yes, we've made extra. The Ukraine war has caused the price of oil to rise. That will boost our economy. All right. That will increase our dollar reserve, because when we have large dollar reserve, we can do so many things in Nigeria. We can develop, because we need large dollar reserve to develop. So when there's a rise in oil price, it increases the dollar reserve. That's what Kevin should be telling Nigerians. But when Kevin says that we're making extra 40 billion and we're not doing anything with it, it affects Nigerians, because we can generate. Hello?
African nationality, good evening, sir.
Yeah, I'm you.
I have a question for you. Do you, as a Nigerian who love Nigeria, do you want the truth or do you want to have hope?
Sorry, I can't hear you.
You, as a Nigerian who loves Nigeria, do you want to hear the truth or do you just want to have hope?
That question is that's not a straightforward question right now, because Nigerians have been filled with negative. All right, and when something is too negative, it eventually affects the citizens. The end result of too much negative propaganda is that it makes the citizen hopeless. We can generate resources, we can generate revenue from beside oil. Our youth can work and generate enough revenue, right? But when there's so much negative from the media, it affects the youth. Most of Nigerian youth are hopeless. Even when there's so much opportunities for them to do something very valuable with their time, they are hopeless because of negative propaganda from the media.
African nationalists, unfortunately, I have to cut this short, but thank you for your take. Sir, you have your hand up, so I'm guessing you do have some information for us.
Okay, yes. Quickly, I just wanted to finish up what I was saying and also tell everyone that the Krakowiec border crossing is only for just crossing via cars. So apparently they're not letting people that are walking cross, and some Nigerians are currently stuck there. There's a huge queue that is taking only those that are actually crossing with vehicles. Those that are actually trekking or walking towards that particular border, they're not letting anybody pass through, and the queue is actually very long. They're letting some people pass through, but they're doing a lot of interrogation, so you may be waiting for over 12 hours before you leave that particular area to get to the other border. So the best thing for anybody that is in Krakowiec to do right now, especially for the Nigerians, they should use a taxi from Lviv to Medica. So when they get to Medica, the border crossing there is for pedestrians, so you can easily just walk in via foot. And apparently, I heard that the Nigerian government is currently in talks with the Polish government to allow Nigerians cross the border, because they're still lying there and sleeping, and it's extremely cold. My friend said it's extremely cold, and the weather is getting really, really cold, and they don't have any heater over there. And a church is helping them with food. So whatever the Nigerian government, somebody mentioned the Nigerian government are currently doing something. I think Ola, whatever they're doing, they should do it quickly, because Nigerians are not so good with cold weather. So, and also to just finish up what I was saying earlier, the South African leaders or the South African government, their investments in Russia, it didn't stop them to actually speak up against what is currently going on. They have investments in Russia amounting to over 80 billion rands, which is about $5 billion. But they still spoke up. So I don't know what is stopping Nigeria from actually saying it. Maybe it's because they don't want to give opportunity to, Ukraine being a separatist, maybe Nigeria is looking at it that, if they start talking and siding Ukraine, people may look at IPOB and MASOP or Dudua or any other people who want to separate from the country. Then again, the Sudan military commander recently arrived in Moscow before the war started. And the reason why he went there was so that Russia can help Sudan increase their strength of their army force and to help them currently in the armed violence that is going on in the east of the country. So maybe that's why that part of Africa is currently not saying a word about what is going on. So, I mean, if it's going to impact them in Sudan, I think it's going to be from the part of Russia, because currently their military commander is there trying to get to be in talks and negotiations for them to improve their army strength in Sudan. And to answer the question earlier asked to Kelvin and Ola, I think the only alternative to the Russian gas, and I will stand by that, the only alternative to Russian gas is here in Africa. It is only in Africa. There is no other alternative. So it is a huge opportunity. I don't know why nobody wants it. It is a huge opportunity that Africa is not using, especially Nigeria. It's a huge opportunity that we're not using. What we should be doing right now is bringing in our documents, calling countries, and getting business done. This is going to increase our revenue. Looking at the fact that 20% or over 20% of our exports is actually natural gas. So why are we not actually trying to get this business? And I mean, oil price right now is $100 per barrel. That's a skyrocketing. It's going to actually cause inflation. Everyone is going to suffer it via food and every other thing. But we can actually make business from this. We can get more revenue from this. We can actually start calling these countries who look up to Russia or who do business with Russia concerning gas. And somebody mentioned something about SWIFT's US banning Russia from using SWIFT. Let me just inform that Russia is currently using India to create a back channel so that they can also continue doing business using foreign currency. So yes, it's going to be quite difficult. I don't know why India has chosen to help them, but they are already currently in talks creating back channels that they can use to create as an alternative to SWIFT. I don't know how soon that's going to work. I don't know if it's even going to work at all, but let's just see how that goes. And the other impact that this is going to have on Africa is the fact that a lot of African countries actually get their wheat supply from Russia and Ukraine also. I mean, I think Russia and Ukraine together, they supply about 40 or 50%. I'm not so sure about that statistics, but I think about 40 or 50% of the world wheat in general is gotten from these two countries. So if we are going to say we are going to have a negative impact in what is currently happening, I think the only effect is going to have on us, apart from the fact that we have citizens currently stranded in Russia, rather in Ukraine, the only impact that we're going to have from this is economically, will be not having wheat or not having supply of wheat. And the countries that are going to suffer that will be Egypt, Libya, Algeria. I think Morocco too. I think they get their wheat from Russia. So these are the only countries that are going to suffer it. And if there is no wheat supply, I mean, we are going to be seeing high prices in bread and other flour products. Then Kenya would also have an impact because they supply Russia for tea. Russia is actually one of the world's biggest consumers of tea, and Kenya supply Russia. So maybe that is also the reason why Kenya is among the African countries that haven't spoken up or condemned the war crimes, I will call it war crimes, that Russia is currently doing right now. Maybe that's the reason why Kenya hasn't said anything, because they are one of their highest revenue as a country is gotten from tea supply, and they actually supply to Russia. And Russia is one of the biggest consumers in the whole world. So just imagine how that actually will impact their revenue. So maybe that's why they're trying to be on the safe side. But there's also a problem because generally Africans constitute a high amount of students in Ukraine, a high amount, because it is very, very cheap to study in Ukraine. And their scholarship especially to Africans, it's actually quite huge. So there are a whole lot of Africans in Ukraine. So if the African leaders are saying they don't want to speak up to protect their citizens because they are afraid or because they run business with Russia, I think it's a very selfish move. I think it's one thing that everybody needs to actually speak up about. It's very, very selfish, looking to the fact that these people are also children of other people. And for the fact that a whole lot of them over there study medicine so that they can come back to the country and make our medical business here in the country quite better, and our medical supply is here top notch. It is very, very sad and very disheartening that we have leaders that are not speaking up because they are in business with Russia. And one more thing, or one last thing I would like to say is the fact that a lot of attention will be taken away from Africa, especially when it comes to these diplomatic efforts and actions that are currently going on, because of everybody will be trying to sort out the Russia-Ukraine crisis, especially what is going on right now in Ethiopia and Mozambique. There are a whole lot of conflicts going on here. There's a lot of fights going on there, and there's lots of diplomatic. Yeah, so I think that we're going to also suffer from that too. And those are the impacts I can only think of currently. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for your contribution. Nina, after you want to say something? So Muteiwana, please, you can speak now. Muteiwana, you've had your hand up. Do you want to say something? Okay, Solo
Ubane.
You can speak.
Ubane? Yeah. All right. So good evening. Thank you for this opportunity. So first of all, the last speaker, wow, that's just some good stuff. I didn't even know a lot of wheat came from Russia. So to be honest, I don't know. I think we might, to some extent, I'm not trying to sound pessimistic or anything. To some extent, I don't really see much of a good impact with regards to this conflict and Nigeria. Here's why. The only possibility is with the Russian attacks. I hope not. I pray every Nigerian and every student gets out safely. If it happens that some students or whatever are killed, that's just a diplomatic row between Nigeria and Russia, or whatever, Africa and Russia. And also to Kelvin that also spoke, I mean, that's great knowledge of economics, right? I know someone was saying, why is he pessimistic? It's not, I don't think he's being pessimistic. I think he's being objective in the sense that what good is the price of oil per barrel when it's going into what is, practically a bad system? If you have good money going into a bad system, what changes? You know what I mean? If you look back at 1970, when we had the oil glut, when the Yom Kippur War was going on, the price of oil went up. Okay, when it came into the military government's coffers, how did they manage the money? How well was it managed? So the fact that we still have, a poor petroleum refining and distribution system, what good is going to come out of that? And also, I don't think this is a situation where this is just to talk about the conflict as a whole and in terms of the world as a whole. This is not to, I don't think saying that you don't care about the conflict might not be the right approach, right? Everything is all geopolitics, right? At the end of the day, this is just, it's like communism versus capitalism, right? The Vietnam War, what was it? They were afraid communism was spreading. So they went there. When it also comes to this now, they are afraid of NATO influence. And if we are saying we are dealing with Boko Haram and all this, so we don't need to care about that. But NATO countries have come to Nigeria to try to train our troops to basically weed out these terrorists. American generals have said it, that every time we gave intel to the Nigerian military, somehow Boko Haram managed to know about it. So in summary, what I'm trying to say is it's important that we just know about geopolitics, because it can give us a sense of how, I hate to say this, but it gives us a sense of how a conflict can either benefit or hurt the Nigerian economy as a whole. Thank you. I rest my case.
Thank you very much. Let's hear from Akin Teshegun.
Hello? Can everyone hear me? I don't know if I'm clear enough because I
Yes, we can.
struggling.
Good evening.
Yeah,
Yes,
good
we
evening.
can. Please go on.
All right, so I've been hearing conversations from, especially from Africa, about how they're feeding us, how Nigerians have been fed with negative information and blah blah. But the reality is this: no matter how much we try and face the facts, Nigeria is being run by few people that don't understand basic economics. So, as much as oil went as high as 103 per barrel this 2 days ago, Nigeria is actually not even benefiting from this increase in Brent oil because they pay virtually almost more than 70% back for oil subsidy. So what's like the essence of? That's why we've been advocating that if it's possible, let them just shake off, remove the subsidy, we'll face the economic shake, and we know we'll move on. This thing has been on and on for almost 6 years now, and we've been paying subsidies. No matter how high oil gets, virtually everything goes back to payment of subsidy. So we are not even benefiting of this 103 per barrel. Number two, we are not even now producing up to capacity. As at the last time in December, we were producing 1.2 per barrel, and OPEC is expecting us to be producing 1.7 per barrel. As at January, we increased production to it's not 1.3 or 1.4, while our OPEC increased our production capacities, our production requirements, because now that Russia has been affected with all of this war, we've not been able to export oil, and we know Russia is one of the highest producers of gas and oil in the world. Now Nigeria's requirement to produce per barrel has increased, but we can't even meet up to that capacity. And we have the crude. We have excess crude, but the problem is the administration has just choose to remain stagnant. They don't want to invest in oil. They don't want to invest in anything. We are just fine with bringing in oil. And the problem is we are paying so much when it comes to the subsidy. So we are basically just returning virtually everything we earn back. And it's just basic economics. Fix the rudiments in the local economy. Invest in fixing your refineries. If you cannot fix your refineries, build a one. Once you build a new one, then that cost of bringing in oil from other nations back to Nigeria, you have cut off that oil. I know refining initially, if we invest, might be more expensive when we start, but over time we might build comparative advantage because this oil, this crude is in our land. Fine, when we start this process, it might be very expensive to start refining our oil, but if over time we continue that process in 2, 3, 4, 5 years, we would realize that we have comparative advantage producing and refining our oil. But they choose not to understand this. And so the discussion where Africa is saying their angle is called Africa was saying we've been fed with negative information. The fact is that we are not benefiting of this, what did they call it? This increase in crude price, crude oil. It doesn't make sense. That's the problem, and it's just because of the people in power choose not to understand basic economics. If they understand basic economics, they would. And again, we are now paying virtually all our revenues going to repayment of debts. I saw a statistics in 2021 for every 1 naira Nigeria mix, 98%, 98 kobo is going back for debt repayments. How will we survive? Our debt to revenue ratio is 98%. That's crazy. And we keep on borrowing as a nation every time, and it's on and on. So the basic problem is the people in power choose not to understand basic economics. Invest in your local production. Nobody would even care about whether Naira is weakening. The moment Nigeria start producing, we start refining our oil, the local economy is producing. Economists in the world even loves when our currency is cheaper because they want to afford to buy from us because our currency is weak. So the reason why Nigerians are complaining now, I'll round off so that I don't hog the mic. The reason why Nigerians are just complaining that Naira is this is because we're not producing enough. If we're producing well in our local economy, no Nigerian will even care about whether Naira is $1 to 700 Naira. No Nigerian will care. But it's because the moment we're producing, it will be cheaper in our local markets, and international bodies will want to buy from us. But because of our government does not understand all of these things, they just keep on going through this cycle on, and they are using us to play politics. Buhari and his government should have removed this oil subsidy this January. I know it might shake us a bit, but on the long run, it's better, just because they don't want to lose the economic seat, their political seats come the next election. They are now trying to play safe and say they will not remove it. And now they are now going to borrow money, over 300 billion, to now start paying subsidies that was not even put in our budget, because our budget did not include the subsidy. But now they have to start borrowing again, over 300 billion, to finance the subsidy for the year. Where is that money going to come from? No one knows. The Brent oil increase also, we are not taking advantage of it. So that's the problem about the government and the basic economics they choose not to understand. Let me just stop talking from here.
Thank you very much to all of our speakers so far. We usually do this for just 2 hours, from 7 to 9 p.m. Every Tuesday and Friday. So I want to thank you for joining. But because we started a bit later today, because of the nature of this conversation, we may continue for another 10 minutes and wrap it up. But we're discussing the Russia versus Ukraine conflict and its impact on Nigeria and Africa. And we've had speakers speak on it from a security perspective and also from an economic perspective. We also have had some Nigerians come up with numbers and contact details to help Nigerians who are stuck. And so we'll be wrapping up in about 10 minutes. But before we go, let a couple of speakers speak, and then Kevin will give the closing words, also for and then we will wrap up. But Ale, you haven't spoken, so we'll let you speak before bringing us.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak here. I guess we can hear me clearly. Okay, so I want to take it up from where Sarah stopped concerning the issue of wheat. Nigeria imports wheat around $600 million annually, and most of our importation comes from America and from Canada and from that side. I believe this Russia and the Ukraine crisis is also going to significantly impact the volume of wheat that comes into this part of the world, the Africa continent, and that's something that should be something for us to learn. About 5 years ago, Chivadu Obedi, former Minister of Agriculture, mentioned something on national TV. He said to some countries, the video is still on Channels TV, on the YouTube. He said some countries, they refuse to, they said they are going to stop buying our crude oil if we stop importing wheat from them. And this, it shocked me. It really shocked me when I heard that. I was watching it on TV and the minister could say it. And, this, shows the extent of the geopolitics that goes into even the food crops that we eat and even the political economy of some of these things. And, sometimes I work in the agricultural space and we look at some of the funding that also come into agricultural development in Nigeria. The funding goes basically to, some low value crops like cassava, maybe maize and some other things. And when it comes to high value crops that we can have we also have relative advantage when it comes to production like wheat. So most of the fundings don't go into that. So this is something that is very important for Nigeria. We have to be intentional about our development. We have agencies of government and even some, local, national research institutes that are working to developing wheat in Nigeria, releasing new varieties that can do very well. But we also know, some people in the space know that there are efforts internationally to frustrate the development of this very critical crop. We have big wheat importers, the Flour Milling Association is like a consortium of the big wheat processors in Nigeria, the Dangote, the Boa, the flour mills, and some of these people that produce pasta and all that. So some of them, they came together and developed the Flour Milling Association, and they are producing wheat locally. But what they are producing is, significantly not enough to meet our needs. I just mentioned the figure of about $600 million annually in wheat importation, and that's massive. Now, if Russia, by reason of sanctions and some other trade blockades, Russia wouldn't be able to, send wheat to maybe some part of Europe, and that means, we are going to be left at the mercy of some of these things that we could have developed ourselves. So our government needs to be intentional, very, very intentional about
developing these critical crops. I believe wheat, as I said, is something that everybody consumes every now and then. So, and we have the land. We have a lot of arable land. Even when you look at the Kano Plains, the Jigawa, the Northwest, and even we have varieties these days in Nigeria that can do well during the rainfall season, during the rainy season. They do well in Jos, in the Mambila Plateau, in Obudu, and some other places. So we should just develop ourselves. If a country is threatening that they will stop buying Nigeria's crude oil because we are going to want to develop our wheat, then that calls for serious introspection, and they also need to speak to ourselves and say we can't just put our destiny in the hand of these people. If they don't want to buy a crude oil again, of course, crude oil is another thing, and even natural gas in the whole topic of discourse. But then we have to be able to feed ourselves. So I don't know. I wouldn't want to say much further from here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ara. And for all our listeners, Kelvin, I'll let you give your closing remarks, and we'll see if we can bring Fola up for his as well. Over to you, Kelvin.
Andy, thank you. In closing, I just want to celebrate you. You're such an amazing host. Like your consistency and your moderation abilities, and it's amazing. Thank you so much for hosting this session every day.
Thank you.
Before I say my final thoughts, which will be very brief, I also want to say that my heart and prayers are with Ukrainians on a daily basis. It's heartbreaking what is happening. Real people that are losing their lives, they're losing their properties, their assets, what they've earned and worked for over the years. People have to flee and carry just one backside and one bag. It's heartbreaking. I watched a video of a father who was saying goodbye to his wife and his daughter. It's completely heartbreaking. I just want to talk about briefly the need, very, very briefly. It's not going to take more than up to 2 minutes. The need for the Nigerian government to take backward integration seriously. Nigeria has a $12 billion import bill for food on a yearly basis. Nigeria needs to take backward integration seriously because I believe the world is getting into an era where issues like this is going to force it from globalization into protectionism. And these are some of the things that Donald Trump addressed, even if I'm not a fan of him, his politics. He addressed. You notice that a few months ago, or a few weeks ago, the Argentinian government announced they were going to restrict the export of grains. Argentina is actually a major producer and exporter of grains around the world. And this is the time for Nigeria to take its food security seriously. And I say it all the time. The government, National Security Council of the Nigerian government cannot talk about national security without addressing food security. I'll just leave it at that. Thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you very much, Kelvin, for your constant contribution to our Twitter spaces and also bringing the numbers and data to the table. Because of time, we will be wrapping up soon, but we do this every Tuesday and Friday from 7 till 9 p.m., where we discuss politics, policy, people, and Nigeria, especially issues affecting Nigerians. I want to say thank you to Funmilayo and Sarah, who have also provided information for Nigerians within the region, and to Fola Aina, who provided a technical security angle to this conversation, and to all of our speakers. To those who have sent requests and we couldn't bring up, we apologize, but we try to keep it strictly to 2 hours to avoid the African time mentality, but we dragged this conversation on today to accommodate everyone. So thank you to those who even were brought up. My name is Andy Madaki, and we'll be back next week, Tuesday. Have a blessed weekend.